Since the early days in which human societies were conducting rain dances to appease the sky so that it would rain, humans have been entranced by the thought that supernatural beings govern our way of living. This is true in all parts of the world, not just one niche corner of the earth, so it is safe to assume that there is something fundamental in the human psyche that creates the allure of gods. However, divine beliefs are not the same across all time periods, and there is a clear evolution from natural spirits to polytheistic religions that have their gods reflect archetypes and emotions such as the Greek, Roman, and Egyptian mythologies, eventually to the monotheistic religions which have dominated the religious mind space for more than a millennium. It seems that religious beliefs have evolved just as society has, as we have become more civilized. And why is it now that the world has seemed to leave God behind, we face so much trouble? This video is not to convince you that God is real, at least not in the same sense that Muslims or Christians would have you believe, but instead to open the discussion on the merits of religion, what humans get wrong, and why it is necessary for society to adopt religion in some way if we are to continue to evolve psychologically. Let's start with tribal traditions. These serve as the root for all religion. They appear at the early stages of psychological development. But why is this? If we look at this from the ground up, what is the first step in our psychological development? That would be the appearance of emotions and survival instincts. These two fundamental components of the human experience control much of how we interact with the world. The realization of this is followed by the discovery that others also have these same components. This leads to the formation of tribes, as humans are able to connect beyond the surface level. If someone seems weak, maybe they need food. If someone is angry, maybe they feel betrayed. However, since this is still an early stage of thinking, this applies not only to humans, but to everything in our lived experience. If there is an earthquake, for example, it's because we have betrayed the earth. If there is a drought, we must appease the sky so that it stops withholding water. It is easy to see from this that tribes may associate the earth or the sky with spirits they must live alongside, to feel their warmth rather than to feel their wrath. So how did we go from these spirits to gods? In the tribal animist traditions, they were oppressed by the spirits, and that if they displeased them, they were punished. As a solution, let's look back at the psychological development of our tribal people. Some bright and scheming individuals may recognise that if they can manipulate the social situations they occupy by appealing to the recently discovered emotions and survival needs of others, they can gain power over them and get more of what they want. This reflection is an internal look at what can I do to control my situation, and how does this reflect in the spiritual world? To conquer the spirits, there needs to be a more powerful entity, a god. And since this is an inward look at what I can do rather than what am I up against, this should be reflected in the beliefs associated with the gods. We see this in the best example of Greek mythology. As Carl Jung would see it, the Greek gods represent archetypes that animate people in different situations. If you were seeking love, you would pray that Aphrodite would help you charm a potential lover. If you were a warrior on his way to fight a battle, you would hope that Ares would bless you on this day. This is setting up a pattern of psychological development, or levels of existence that align with the theories of Clare Graves. On the personal level, there is an inward-looking emotion and survival need. Then there is an outward-looking tribe, and then the inward-looking power-seeking ego. This is reflected on a group level. First, we need to survive. Then, what is our environment doing to prevent our survival? And then, how can we exert our power on the world to resolve our oppression? So where would this pattern lead next? surely a new outward look. This is exactly what we find when we look at monotheism. To start again at the personal level, when everyone is manipulating, scheming, and exploiting others for their own gain, you live in a hellscape, constantly in fear of being stabbed in the back. Life is no longer about simply surviving. It is about gaining power so that you're safe and protect what you love, whether that be yourself, your family, or your friends. When even the leaders of such a society are just as power hungry, and how could they not be if they rose to the top, the society is not living up to its potential. As if everyone put the interests of others above their own, everyone would be better off. Of course, to do this, someone would need to hold the leaders to account. Otherwise, what's stopping them from using their power for personal gain? The solution to this is a form of decentralized authority. I'm sure by now you already know where this is heading in terms of the spiritual world's reflection of this. What could keep gods in check? What is more powerful than deities that are second to none over the dominion they rule? That would of course be one all-powerful, all-knowing God that is the greatest and above everything else before it. This new paradigm was so powerful and so effective, it has ruled over all the major religions across the entire world and has built everything as you see it today. The Abrahamic religions are continuations of the same one all-powerful God. Hinduism has Brahman, the supreme God, and while Buddhism is not a theistic religion, you will have a hard time convincing me that the concept of karma, which decides your fate based on good or bad intentions, is different from God in any meaningful way except from being a more permissive version. The outsourcing of authority to an all-powerful being solves the problems of corruption and self-interest, as the masses can sleep at night knowing that their leader is under the watchful eye of their almighty Lord. Despite its immense success in building more complex societies, religion has clearly struggled with the rise of the scientific method. Since you can't prove God's existence with science, how can we have faith that bad actors will be punished if they betray us? Despite this, the principles of outsourcing authority still live on. Take the USA for example. The Constitution made by the Founding Fathers holds as a way for future leaders to be held accountable through the law rather than through a deity. It seems though, at least in the West, we are starting to forget our history and where we came from and how everything led to this point. Many in the West are turning their back on religious principles. This is happening because our religions are increasingly being seen as chaff because of the mythological framing of them. This was less of an issue in the 18th century, when religious principles were still tightly integrated to everyone's way of life. They took what worked and built upon it in materialistic ways. But the inertia of divine worship is fading as the decades and centuries pass. Religions are becoming lost knowledge. This will have consequences for the West if this continues. More and more Jenga blocks will be removed until it all comes crashing down. But what is the solution here? Well, we have two options. We can choose to transcend religion, taking the knowledge that built our society seriously and continue to build on it. We can also ignore it at our own great expense. In future videos, I will be discussing the former, as well as more details about how we got to this point.